Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today in Scottsdale, Arizona at Firearms, taking a look at a couple of the interesting guns out of their reference collection. This, of course, looks like a Browning M1918A2 BAR, but it is actually a Browning M1918 M.O.R. This is a manually operated rifle, and it is a gun that was designed specifically for the reenactor community in the 1980s. So this was the brainchild of a guy named Walter Newman. Newman owned and ran a company called Group Industries. Now, Group Industries in the 1980s was manufacturing transferrable BAR receivers. Well, and full BARs. He basically bought a whole bunch of BAR parts kits, imported them into the US, and then manufactured new machine gun receivers for them. And because this was before 1986, he was able to just manufacture and register these receivers and create transferrable machine guns. Just the same way you can make new short-barreled rifles still today, you could make new machine guns before 1986. So he did this, and he was selling a bunch of them. There are a lot of Group Industries machine guns out there today, thanks to Walter Newman. But part of his customer base wasn't really that excited about having to go through the NFA process. They didn't want to pay the $200 tax, which in the 80s was still a really substantial amount of money. And they didn't necessarily need an actual machine gun. What they wanted was something for, a cool wall hanger or reenacting in particular. And so Newman was trying to figure out, how do I do a BAR that looks accurate and that fires but isn't subject to the NFA and doesn't require a whole lot of work? Because if he rebuilds a semi-auto but it costs $200 over what he can build an original gun for, well, he hasn't really saved people any money. So he comes up with the idea of a manually operated rifle where he leaves the gas tube out, or the gas piston out of the gun completely, and leaves out some critical elements in the receiver so that you can't just install a gas piston, and all of a sudden, presto, you have a single shot BAR. It still fires from an open bolt. In fact, I'll show you. Lock the bolt open, pull the trigger, it'll drop, boom, it fires, but then nothing happens because there's no gas system. So this was the MOR, and a grand total of 68 of these were made. And we'll talk about why so few in just a minute, but first let me show you what exactly he did to modify the design here. Sorry for the interruption, just want to say that today's video is brought to you by Headstamp Publishing, with an extensive catalog of books on all sorts of interesting and esoteric small arms, everything from World War II small arms to Imperial Japanese swords to the earliest of revolvers and Cold War battle rifles. There is something at Headstamp for every firearms enthusiast. Check it out, links in the description text below. All right, from the outside, this looks exactly like a real actual surplus M1918A2 World War II BAR. In fact, kind of funny story, when Firearms picked this up, they were buying a collection, whole collection of guns, and they went to take a look at this one, and the bolt locked open when they ran the charging handle, and then it fires, and like, uh-oh, is that an unregistered machine gun? Well, no, it's the manually operated rifle. So there it is, Browning M.O.R. rifle, little doubling up there. Caliber 30 M1918A2, manufactured by Group Industries. So these markings are specifically made to mimic the look of actual World War II machine guns. Just the company name is different. 68 of these were made. They started at 700,001, went up to 700,068. Just for reference sake, here is an actual real 1918 A2. So you can see MANFD by Royal Typewriter, MANFD by Group Industries. All right, let's go ahead and take this apart. We will start with the forend here. Pop that pin out. And then we can slide this off. And we have a gas tube here, but there's no gas piston inside. Normally, the BAR has an operating rod slide gas piston that comes out the front of the receiver here and runs all the way up in this gas tube, all the way out to the end. So for realism's sake, they left this part completely intact. There's actually still a gas port on the barrel, and there's a matching gas port here in the gas tube, but nothing inside it. And if we look at the front of the receiver here, you can see it's solid, so there's no opening for that slide or gas piston to enter. Next up, let's take out the trigger group. All right, there we go. Pull that pin out. Trigger group comes out. Now, this is our MOR trigger group. This is a live 1918 A2 BAR trigger group, and they are exactly identical. There were absolutely no modifications made to the trigger group because there didn't have to be. Because this thing has no gas system, it doesn't matter what sort of machine gun parts you might have in the fire control group, it's never going to fire more than one round at a time if there's nothing actually cycling the action. So no modifications at all required to the trigger group, but they did have to make some modifications in here. So this is our live BIR, this is our manually operated rifle. You will notice on the real BAR, we have this slide. So when I cycle the action, you can see this rail right here coming back, and that is connected to the gas piston up front. On the manually operated rifle, they cut that completely off. So you've got just the back end here of that slide in place, and then there are no rails for it to run in. The rails are not cut any farther forward than right there, so you can't put, even if you were to mill out the front, you'd have to do a whole lot more milling to be able to fit an original BAR operating rod into this. Now, that does have a conundrum, which is on the real BAR, the recoil spring is up here. It's wrapped around the gas tube. So what do you do for a recoil spring? Well, the answer is kind of copy what they did on the FND. They moved the recoil spring into the buttstock and added this connecting rod right here so that when the bolt goes backward, it's going to compress the recoil spring down here through that rod. So if I take off the butt plate, I can pull off the butt stock here, and this originally was the rate reducer. It just now has a recoil spring in it that's connected by this rod through right into there. So really a pretty clever, pretty simple modification to give people a BAR that looks right, that handles right, feels right. It'll shoot, but it'll only shoot one round at a time. Then you have to manually cycle it without subjecting it to the NFA registry. It is ultimately the Hughes Amendment that is responsible for there being so few of these, only 68 of them. And that's because Newman made these guns slowly. It's not clear to me exactly how many he actually completed himself, as opposed to just manufacturing the receivers, before the Hughes Amendment passed. Now, the Hughes Amendment in 1986 closed the registry to new transferable machine guns in the United States. Prior to that, you could make one, register it, and sell it to anybody that could own a gun. After that, you couldn't make transferable new guns. Any newly made machine gun in the United States was what was now called a post-86 dealer sample, and it could only be possessed by licensed machine gun dealers or police or law enforcement. And that put group industries out of business. So things like the manually operated rifle were neat side projects, but they were not enough to sustain his business. He went bankrupt, and group industries' assets were put up for sale to pay creditors. Among them, all of the remaining MOR receivers. So these were assembled by a variety of different gunsmiths. A guy named Stan Andruski, who is an SOT making guns at the time, did a bunch of them. Don't know exactly how many. A lady named Valerie Johnson, whose company is Valkyrie Arms, whom you may know from semi-auto grease guns and Delisle carbine reproductions. She put together 22 of them and sold them. Of course, all of these were going to be marked Group Industries because Group Industries manufactured all of the receivers. What just happened was when they went out of business, the receivers and their parts kits all went up for sale. Some of these people who were experienced in the gun business would buy parts kits and receivers, assemble the guns together, and ship them out. Now, the other group that got them was a guy named Robert Landis, who at the time ran a company called Collector's Corner. Today, he and his son run Ohio Ordnance Works, much better known company. They got 10 of these as part of a group deal along with 200 full auto receivers and parts kits. So they assembled those remaining machine guns on transferable receivers, sold them all. That was one of the things Ohio Ordnance did. And then they put together these manually operated rifles and modified the parts kits, set these guns up, sold them. And they started getting feedback from customers who, first off, wanted to know, like, maybe, do you have any more of these? Which they didn't, because they only had the 10 receivers that Group had made. And then also, well, the manually operated rifle is not really that much fun because you have to manually rack it for every shot, and that kind of sucks. What about a semi-auto? Could you do a semi-auto only version of the BAR? And Ohio Ordnance, the Landies, thought to themselves, well, maybe we could. And the result of that was their M1918A2 semi-automatic version of the BAR, which they started assembling, I think, in the 1990s. Continues to this day. It started out using almost entirely surplus parts, and as the surplus kits have dried up, they've started manufacturing more and more of their own parts, to the point that today they make those 1919A3s out of, I believe, 100% new-made parts for their semi-auto BARs. And of course, they also do the HCAR, the modernized BAR. So anyway, this is that intermediate step. This was like the first step in how do we make a non-NFA BAR for people who want to play with a BAR. Well, the manually operated rifle. Big thanks to Bear Arms for giving me access to this one. These are, of course, really scarce today. It's not necessarily like they're in huge demand, but there aren't that many of them out there. So cool to be able to show this one to you. A big thanks to Bob Landies III for answering some questions of mine and giving me some really good information on this so that I could pass it along to you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.